The air in Copper Gulch, Montana, hung thick with anticipation as Elizabeth Hayes stumbled onto the wooden platform, her hands bound before her and her swollen belly straining against a worn cotton dress. Terror clouded her vision as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square, announcing her debts to the gathered crowd of men whose hungry eyes reflected nothing but cruel intentions. The summer of 1876 had been merciless to 23-year-old Elizabeth, a young widow whose late husband had left her with nothing but mounting debts and an unborn child. The territorial law permitting debt collection through indentured servitude had sealed her fate, and now she stood trembling as men called out their offers, each bid determining years of her life and that of her unborn child. $200 for the woman. Who'll give me $250? The auctioneer called, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Elizabeth's eyes darted desperately around the square, searching for any hint of compassion among the sea of weathered faces. Her gaze fell upon a tall figure standing at the back of the gathering. Unlike the others, he wasn't jostling for position or shouting bids. He simply watched, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. $500, called a gruff voice from the front. A portly man with yellowed teeth leered at Elizabeth, his eyes traveling lewdly over her form. "She'll work just fine in my establishment." Elizabeth knew what that meant. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the horror awaiting her at Harlan's brothel. $800, came another voice, this one belonging to the owner of the silver mine outside town, a man known for working his laborers to death. The auctioneer grinned, sensing a profitable bidding war. $800 for this fine woman. Who'll give me $3,000. The crowd fell silent, all heads turning toward the source of the voice. The tall man at the back had stepped forward, his boots kicking up dust as he approached the platform. As he came into the light, Elizabeth could see him clearly for the first time, a lean, muscular cowboy with intense eyes and a face weathered by sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "I said 3,000, he repeated, his voice steady and firm. The auctioneer's mouth hung open. $3,000. That's more than it covers her debts in full, don't it? The cowboy interrupted, pulling a leather pouch from inside his vest. Well, yes, but then it's settled. The cowboy climbed the steps to the platform and began counting out gold coins onto the auctioneer's table. Elizabeth stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever commanded so much money for an indentured servant, let alone a pregnant woman. The stranger finished counting his payment, then turned to face her. Up close, she could see his eyes were a deep shade of green, intent but not unkind. "Miss," he said simply, removing a knife from his belt. Elizabeth flinched, but he merely cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free to go." Her hands fell to her sides, the rope marks still visible on her skin. What do you mean?" she whispered. "I mean you don't owe anyone anything anymore," he said quietly. "Your debts are paid." The auctioneer coughed nervously. "Now hold on, Mr. Owens. You've purchased this woman fair and square. She's yours to—" "I didn't purchase her," the cowboy cut in sharply. "I paid her debts. There's a difference." He turned back to Elizabeth. "Do you have somewhere to go, madam?" Elizabeth's mind raced. Her small homestead had been seized weeks ago. Her friends had turned their backs when her situation worsened. She had nowhere, no one. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The man nodded once, as though he'd expected this answer. "My name's Owen Ellison. I have a ranch about 10 miles west of here. You're welcome to stay there until you get your bearings. No strings attached," he added, seeming to read the suspicion in her eyes. Before Elizabeth could respond, a commotion broke out in the crowd. The portly man who had bid earlier pushed his way forward, his face flushed with anger. "This ain't right," he shouted. "Women like her go for a few hundred at most. He's changing the rules." Several men murmured in agreement, their disappointed gazes fixed on Elizabeth. The sheriff, a tall man with a gray mustache, stepped forward. "Harlan, the bid's been accepted. Mr. Ellison paid fair and square." "Then he owns her," Harlan insisted, pointing a stubby finger at Elizabeth. "He can't just set her free." "Actually, he can," the sheriff replied. "The law says a debt can be settled by any party, and once settled, the debtor is free. There's nothing that says Mr. Ellison has to take possession of anyone." Harlan spat on the ground. "This is robbery. That woman would have worked for me for years." Owen stepped slightly in front of Elizabeth, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "The lady's free now. I suggest you find someone else to exploit." For a tense moment, it seemed Harlan might push the issue further, but something in Owen's steady gaze made him think better of it. With a final curse, he turned and stalked away, the disappointed crowd dispersing after him. The auctioneer handed Owen a receipt for the payment, then quickly packed up his ledger and hurried away, clearly uncomfortable with how the auction had concluded. Left alone on the platform with her mysterious benefactor, Elizabeth finally found her voice. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Owen Ellison tucked the receipt into his pocket and adjusted his hat. "My ma always taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their debts or misfortunes." He glanced at her pregnant belly. "Besides, there's 2 lives at stake here. Seemed like the right thing to do." Elizabeth placed a protective hand over her stomach. 7 months along now, the baby had been kicking strongly for weeks. "I don't know how I could ever repay such kindness." "You don't need to," he said simply, "but my offer stands. I have a spare cabin on my property where you could stay until after the baby comes. My sister helps me run the ranch. She'd be glad for the female company." Elizabeth hesitated. Going off with a strange man, no matter how apparently kind, carried its own risks. Yet what choice did she have? As if sensing her dilemma, Owen added, "Or I could pay for a room at the boarding house in town if you'd prefer." The sincerity in his voice decided her. "No," Elizabeth said. "Your offer is too generous already. If you truly have room at your ranch, I would be grateful for the shelter." Owen nodded and offered his arm to help her down the steps. "My wagon's this way. Are you steady enough to walk?" "Yes, thank you." Elizabeth took his arm, noticing the strong muscle beneath his cotton shirt. Despite her situation, she felt the first flicker of hope she'd experienced in months. As they crossed the town square, people stared openly at them. Elizabeth kept her eyes downcast, shame burning her cheeks, but Owen walked tall, seemingly unbothered by the attention. His wagon was simple but well-maintained, with 2 healthy-looking horses hitched to the front. He helped her up onto the wooden seat, careful of her condition, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch," he explained as they pulled away from town. "The road's a bit rough in places. Let me know if you need to stop." As the buildings of Copper Gulch receded behind them, Elizabeth gazed out at the vast Montana landscape. Rolling plains stretched toward distant mountains, the summer grass golden under the afternoon sun. It was beautiful country, even in her circumstances. "Mr. Ellison," she began. "Owen," he corrected gently. "Owen," she repeated. "I'm Elizabeth Hayes, and I truly don't know how to thank you." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Hayes. Just focus on keeping yourself and your little one healthy." "Miss Hayes," she corrected automatically, then felt compelled to explain. "My husband died 6 months ago, typhoid fever." Owen nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss, thank you." Elizabeth smoothed her dress over her belly, thinking of Joseph and how excited he'd been about becoming a father. He was a good man, but not very practical with money. When he passed, I discovered we were deeply in debt. I tried to work to pay it off, but... She gestured helplessly at her pregnant form. No one would hire you, Owen finished for her. Some did for a while, but as I grew larger. She trailed off, remembering the increasingly desperate months, the mounting pressure from creditors, the final humiliation of being seized for auction. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon jolting occasionally over ruts in the road. Elizabeth studied her savior from the corner of her eye. Owen Ellison was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and that intense green gaze that seemed to see more than was comfortable. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He handled the wagon with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "How large is your ranch?" she asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to break the silence. 800 acres, he replied. Not the biggest in these parts, but it's good land. Raising cattle mainly, though we keep some horses too. And you said your sister lives with you? Owen nodded. Olivia. She's 2 years younger than me. Our parents passed on when we were young. We worked the ranch together ever since. A smile touched his lips. She's a force of nature, my sister. You'll like her, I think. The thought of another woman at the ranch eased Elizabeth's remaining concerns about going home with this stranger. What made you come to the auction today? She asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd stepped forward. Owen's hands tightened slightly on the reins. I was in town for supplies. Heard about it from the general store owner. His jaw tensed. Never did care for the practice of selling people for debt. Seems too close to other kinds of bondage this country should have left behind. Elizabeth noticed how he deliberately avoided looking at her as he said this. There was something he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. After all, he'd saved her from a fate worse than death. She owed him his privacy. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Owen pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a gentle valley. That's the ranch. We call it Ellison Creek, on account of the stream that runs through the property. As they drew closer, Elizabeth could make out a substantial main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, several outbuildings, and, set a little apart, a smaller cabin. The place looked well tended, with fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. It was modest compared to some of the grand ranches owned by cattle barons, but it spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than exploitation. A woman emerged from the main house as they approached, shading her eyes against the setting sun. She was tall and slender, with the same dark hair as Owen, though hers was pulled back in a practical braid. "You've been gone all day," she called as the wagon pulled into the yard. "I was beginning to." She stopped abruptly as she noticed Elizabeth. "Oh, you've brought company." Owen set the brake and jumped down from the wagon, then came around to help Elizabeth descend. "Olivia, this is Miss Elizabeth Hayes. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Miss Hayes, my sister, Olivia Ellison." Olivia's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Welcome to Ellison Creek, Miss Hayes." Elizabeth took her hand gratefully. "Please call me Elizabeth. Your brother has been very kind to me today." Olivia's eyes flickered to her brother, then back to Elizabeth's pregnant form. Understanding dawned in her expression. "The debt auction," she said quietly. "Owen mentioned it this morning." Owen nodded. "Miss Hayes needs a safe place until her child is born. I offered the old cabin." Olivia's face broke into a warm smile. "Of course, that's a wonderful idea. It needs a good cleaning, but it's sound. We can make it comfortable in no time." She took Elizabeth's arm. "You must be exhausted. Come inside for some supper and we'll sort everything out." As they walked toward the house, Elizabeth glanced back at Owen, who was beginning to unload supplies from the wagon. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, as if to reassure her that she was welcome here. For the first time in months, Elizabeth felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't safe, yet her baby was still weeks from being born, her future still uncertain, but for this moment at least, she had shelter, and the unexpected kindness of strangers who asked nothing in return. Inside the Ellison home, Elizabeth was struck by its welcoming atmosphere. Though simply furnished, the main room was clean and orderly, with a stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and colorful quilts that added warmth. A bookshelf held more volumes than she would have expected on a cattle ranch, and small touches, a vase of wildflowers. A carved wooden horse on the mantel spoke of people who took pride in their home. "Sit, please," Olivia urged, guiding Elizabeth to a cushioned chair. "You look dead on your feet." "When did you last eat?" Elizabeth tried to remember. "Yesterday evening, I think," she admitted. "They gave us nothing at the holding cells." Olivia's face darkened with anger. "Barbaric," she muttered. "Well, you're here now, and we'll get some food in you straight away." She bustled to the kitchen area and began pulling out bread, cheese, and cold meat from a cupboard. "This will tide you over until supper's ready." As Elizabeth gratefully accepted the impromptu meal, Owen entered the house, carrying her small bundle of possessions, the few items the creditors had allowed her to keep. "I'll take these to the cabin later," he said, setting the bundle on a bench by the door. "First, let me show you around a bit if you're feeling up to it." Elizabeth nodded, finishing a piece of bread. "I'd like that." After she'd eaten enough to satisfy Olivia, Owen led her outside, walking slowly to accommodate her condition. The ranch looked even more impressive up close, well organized and efficiently run, with corrals for the horses, a smokehouse, a workshop, and several smaller structures. "The cabin is just over there," Owen pointed to the small building about 100 yards from the main house. "It's where our parents lived when they first came here. After they built the bigger house, it became a place for hired hands, but we haven't needed extra help in recent years." As they approached the cabin, Elizabeth could see it was sturdy if a bit weathered. Owen pushed open the door to reveal a single room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bed frame. Dust covered every surface and cobwebs hung in the corners, but the structure itself appeared sound. "It needs work," Owen acknowledged, "but we can have it ready by tonight. There's a pump out back for water." Elizabeth stepped inside, running her hand along a simple wooden table. Despite its current state, she could see the potential for comfort here. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. Owen studied her face. "Are you sure?" "You're welcome to take a room in the main house if you'd prefer." "No, this is wonderful." Elizabeth felt tears threatening again. "The privacy will be nice, especially when the baby comes." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll fix the door lock today." "You'll be safe here, but I want you to have that security." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched Elizabeth deeply. In her vulnerable state, knowing she could lock her door against the world meant more than she could express. They walked back to the main house as the sun began to set, painting the valley in hues of orange and gold. The sight was so beautiful it made Elizabeth's heart ache. "Your ranch is lovely," she said softly. "Thank you. It was wild land when my father claimed it. He and my mother built it from nothing." Pride colored Owen's voice. "We've added to it over the years. You and Olivia must have worked very hard." "It's been a good life," he said simply. "Difficult at times, but good." As they reached the house, delicious smells wafted from the open windows. Inside, Olivia had prepared a hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and green beans. Elizabeth hadn't realized how ravenous she was until the food was before her. She ate gratefully, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite her hunger. Olivia chatted easily throughout the meal, filling the silence with stories about the ranch and questions about Elizabeth that somehow never felt intrusive. Owen spoke less but listened intently, his quiet presence reassuring. "How far along are you?" Olivia asked as they finished the meal. "About 7 months, I think," Elizabeth replied, placing a hand on her stomach. "Have you seen a doctor?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Not since early on. I couldn't afford it." Olivia exchanged a glance with her brother. "Doc Miller comes through every few weeks. He's due next Thursday. We'll make sure he checks on you." "I can't ask you to. You didn't ask," Owen interrupted gently. "We offered." After supper, Olivia insisted that Elizabeth rest while she and Owen prepared the cabin. Too exhausted to protest, Elizabeth dozed in the comfortable chair while the siblings gathered bedding, cleaning supplies, and necessities. She woke to Olivia's gentle hand on her shoulder. "The cabin's ready," Olivia said. "Not perfect yet, but clean and comfortable enough for tonight. Tomorrow we'll do more." Elizabeth followed them to the cabin, amazed at the transformation. The dust and cobwebs were gone, the stone floor swept clean. The bed had been made up with fresh linens, a colorful quilt on top. A fire burned in the hearth, taking the evening chill from the air. Lanterns provided warm light, and a pitcher of water sat on the small table, along with a plate of cookies and a cup. "I've put some of my clothes in the trunk for you," Olivia said, indicating a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. "They might be a bit long, but they'll do until we can alter them properly." Elizabeth turned slowly, taking in all they had done. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll sleep well," Owen replied. "There's soap and towels by the wash basin. If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to come to the main house." Olivia gave her a quick hug. "Breakfast is at sunrise, but sleep as long as you need. I'll check on you in the morning." With that, the siblings left her to settle in. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, overcome by the day's events. Hours ago, she'd been standing on an auction block, facing years of servitude or worse. Now she was safe in a cozy cabin, her debts paid, with people who seemed to want nothing from her but her well-being. She undressed, washed with the cold water from the pitcher, and slipped into a borrowed nightgown. The bed was more comfortable than any she'd slept in for months. As she drifted towards sleep, her hand resting on her rounded belly, she whispered a prayer of thanks for Owen Ellison and his timely appearance in her life. The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and Elizabeth smiled as she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. For the first few days at Ellison Creek, Elizabeth did little but rest and eat. Her body, deprived and stressed for so long, seemed determined to recover lost strength. Olivia brought regular meals to the cabin and often stayed to chat, her forthright manner and kind heart quickly endearing her to Elizabeth. On the fourth morning, Elizabeth woke feeling truly rested for the first time since Joseph's death. The Montana summer sun streamed through the cabin's small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional whinny of horses. It was a peaceful sound, so different from the anxious clamor that had filled her days in town. She dressed in one of Olivia's altered dresses, a simple blue cotton that had been cleverly adjusted to accommodate her pregnancy, and made her way to the main house. The morning air was crisp and sweet, promising another warm day. Olivia looked up in surprise when Elizabeth entered the kitchen. "You're up early. How are you feeling?" "Better," Elizabeth said truthfully. "Much better. And I'd like to help around the ranch if I may. I can't just sit idle while you both work so hard." Olivia wiped her hands on her apron. "That's not necessary. You need to focus on getting stronger for the baby." "Please," Elizabeth insisted. I'm not an invalid, just pregnant, and I'm used to working. It would make me feel less like a charity case. Understanding crossed Olivia's face. All right. There are plenty of things you can do that won't strain you. The garden needs tending, and I could use help with the preserving. The berry bushes are producing like mad this year. Elizabeth smiled gratefully. I'm good with gardens. My mother taught me. Over breakfast, eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits that made Elizabeth's mouth water, Olivia outlined the day's work. Owen had already ridden out at dawn to check on the herd, but would return for the midday meal. He always comes back for dinner, Olivia explained. Says my cooking's worth the ride. It certainly is, Elizabeth agreed, finishing her second biscuit. I haven't eaten this well in. I can't remember when. After breakfast, Olivia showed Elizabeth to the vegetable garden behind the house. It was well established but clearly suffering from neglect. Neither of us has much time for it with all the ranch work, Olivia admitted. But a good garden saves money and keeps us eating fresh through summer and fall. Elizabeth surveyed the rows of plants, tomatoes heavy with ripening fruit, beans climbing their poles, squash spreading their broad leaves across the ground. Weeds competed for space, and many plants needed staking or tying up. I can handle this, she assured Olivia. Working in the garden proved therapeutic for Elizabeth. The feel of soil between her fingers, the satisfaction of clearing weeds from around thriving plants, the scent of tomato leaves in the warm sun, all of it connected her to happier times from her childhood. She worked steadily, taking breaks when her back ached or the baby's movements became too distracting. By midday, she had cleared half the garden and staked several toppling tomato plants. She was tying up a bean vine when a shadow fell across her work. Looking up, she found Owen watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. You shouldn't be kneeling in the dirt in your condition, he said, offering a hand to help her up. Elizabeth accepted his assistance but shook her head. Gardening won't hurt the baby. Women have worked through pregnancy since the beginning of time. She brushed soil from her hands. Besides, it feels good to be useful. Something like respect flickered in Owen's eyes. The garden hasn't looked this good in years, he acknowledged, but don't overdo it. As they walked to the house for dinner, Elizabeth noticed how Owen's gaze kept returning to the garden. Did your mother plant it originally? She asked, sensing there was something significant about the space. Owen nodded. It was her pride and joy. After she passed, Olivia tried to keep it up, but there's never enough time. He hesitated, then added, she would have liked seeing it cared for again. The simple statement revealed more about Owen Ellison than anything he'd said directly. Elizabeth realized that her work in the garden meant something to him beyond mere productivity. It was a connection to his lost mother. Dinner was a lively affair, with Olivia detailing the morning's bread-baking disaster, a batch that refused to rise, and Owen describing a new calf born overnight. Elizabeth found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into the siblings' easy rapport. After the meal, Owen surprised her by asking if she'd like to see more of the ranch. I need to check the north pasture fence, he explained. Thought you might like a ride if you're feeling up to it. I'd love that, Elizabeth said, eager to explore beyond the immediate surroundings of the house. Owen helped her into a small buggy, more comfortable than the wagon they'd ridden from town. As they set off across the ranch, he pointed out features of the land, the creek that gave the ranch its name, the meadows where the best grazing could be found, the stands of pine trees that provided shelter for the cattle in winter storms. Elizabeth listened with interest, noting how his voice softened when he spoke of the land. It was clear that Owen Ellison loved this place deeply, not just as property but as home. The afternoon sun warmed them as they traveled, the buggy's wheels cutting smooth tracks through the grass. They stopped at a rise overlooking a valley where several dozen cattle grazed peacefully. "This is the northern boundary," Owen explained, gesturing to a fence line in the distance. "Beyond that is the Morrison property. Ben Morrison is a good neighbor, fair in his dealings." "How many cattle do you have?" Elizabeth asked, shading her eyes to look out over the herd. "About 300 head. Not a huge operation, but enough to be profitable if we're careful." Owen checked the fence as they talked, pausing occasionally to hammer a loose post or tighten wire. "We drive them to Miles City for shipping east. Hard work, but the prices have been good lately." Elizabeth watched him work, admiring the efficiency of his movements. There was nothing showy about Owen Ellison, just a quiet competence that spoke of years of experience. "What about the winters here?" she asked. "Are they very harsh?" Owen smiled slightly. "They can be brutal. Snow deep enough to reach a horse's belly, temperatures so cold your breath freezes before it falls, but we're prepared for it. The cattle know where to find shelter, and we keep enough hay stored to see them through." As they continued their circuit of the ranch, Elizabeth found herself increasingly impressed by the operation the Ellisons had built. It wasn't the largest or the grandest, but it was well managed and thriving. And unlike many ranches she'd heard of, it seemed to be run without exploitation, no underpaid cowboys, no land grabs, no intimidation of smaller holders. "How long has your family been here?" she asked as they headed back toward the house, the sun beginning its descent in the western sky. "My parents came in '53, just after they married," Owen replied. "This was mostly wilderness then. They built the cabin that first year, spent winters so cold they thought they might not survive. But they loved the land, saw its potential." He paused, looking out over the golden plains. "I was born in that cabin. Olivia too." "And your parents, they died young," Elizabeth ventured, remembering what he'd said about working the ranch with Olivia since they were young. A shadow crossed Owen's face. "A fever took them both in '63. I was 15, Olivia 13. The neighbors wanted to send us back east to relatives, but this was our home. We refused to leave." Elizabeth tried to imagine two teenagers running a ranch alone. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Owen acknowledged, "but we had help. Ben Morrison looked in on us. The woman who ran the general store in town kept an account for us even when we couldn't pay right away, and we were stubborn." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Still are, according to most folks." As they approached the ranch buildings, Elizabeth noticed new activity. A wagon had arrived, and a man in a dark coat was speaking with Olivia near the house. "That's Doc Miller," Owen said, noticing the direction of her gaze. "He must be making his rounds early this month." Elizabeth's heart quickened. It had been so long since she'd had proper medical attention, and concerns about her baby's health had weighed heavily on her mind. Owen seemed to sense her anxiety. "He's a good doctor, trained back east before the war. Knows his business." When they reached the yard, Olivia waved them over. "Elizabeth, I was just telling Doc Miller about you. He's agreed to check you over if you're willing." Dr. Miller was an older man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard. He nodded politely to Elizabeth. "Miss Hayes, Olivia tells me you're expecting in about 2 months. I'd be happy to examine you, make sure everything's progressing as it should." Olivia showed them to Elizabeth's cabin, where she had already prepared for the examination by laying clean sheets on the bed and heating water. "I'll wait outside," Owen said, tipping his hat before retreating. The examination was thorough but gentle, Dr. Miller's manner professional and reassuring. When it was complete, he helped Elizabeth sit up and smiled warmly. "Everything looks just as it should, Miss Hayes. The baby's position is good, heartbeat strong. You're a bit underweight, which isn't surprising given your circumstances, but a few more weeks of Olivia's cooking should remedy that. Relief washed over Elizabeth. So the baby is healthy. Despite everything, babies are remarkably resilient, Doctor Miller assured her. And so are mothers. Just keep eating well, get plenty of rest, and avoid heavy lifting or straining. He packed his instruments into a leather bag. I'll be back through in about 3 weeks. By then, we'll have a better idea of exactly when to expect your little one. After the doctor departed, promising to send some tonic for iron and vitamins, Elizabeth found Owen waiting near the corral, his attention seemingly fixed on a young horse being trained. Dr. Miller says the baby is healthy, she told him, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Owen's expression softened. That's good news. He hesitated, then added, if you're planning to stay until the birth, we should make sure the cabin is properly prepared. You'll need more than just a bed. The implication that she might not stay caught Elizabeth by surprise. Where else would she go? She had no home, no family nearby. Then she realized that Owen was offering her a choice, making it clear that she wasn't obligated to remain at Ellison Creek simply because he had paid her debts. I would like to stay, she said carefully, at least until the baby comes. If that's all right. Owen nodded, seeming pleased by her decision. More than all right, we'll make sure you have everything you need. Over the next few days, the cabin was gradually transformed into a more suitable space for a new mother and baby. Olivia brought a rocking chair from the main house, claiming it was rarely used and would serve Elizabeth better. Owen repaired a chest of drawers he found in the barn and installed a sturdy new lock on the cabin door as promised. Elizabeth continued to work in the garden, which flourished under her attention. She also helped Olivia with cooking and preserving, grateful to be learning skills that would serve her well in the future. The physical work, kept moderate as Dr. Miller had advised, strengthened her body while the regular meals restored her health. More than that, though, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of ranch life. The predictable routine of meals, chores, and rest provided a stability she had sorely lacked since Joseph's death. The quiet evenings spent on the porch of the main house, listening to Owen and Olivia talk about their day, became something she looked forward to. And increasingly, she found her gaze drawn to Owen himself. He was unlike any man she had known before, steady, thoughtful, and unfailingly kind without being condescending. He treated her not as a fragile flower, but as a capable woman temporarily in need of assistance. His respect for her independence, even in her current state, touched something deep within her. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Elizabeth was sitting on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. The baby was particularly active, little feet or hands pressing visibly against her abdomen. She was smiling at a particularly forceful kick when she noticed Owen approaching, a small wooden object in his hands. "Evening," he greeted her. "Olivia sent me with some of those berry tarts you liked." He placed a covered plate on the small table beside her chair. "Thank you," Elizabeth said warmly. "Would you like to join me? The sunset is beautiful tonight." Owen hesitated only briefly before taking a seat on the porch step. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the changing colors of the sky. "What's that you're working on?" Elizabeth asked, nodding toward the piece of wood in his hands. Owen glanced down as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Just a bit of carving. Something I do in the evening sometimes." He held it out for her inspection, and Elizabeth saw it was a small wooden horse, exquisitely detailed despite being only partially complete. The flowing mane and muscular body were rendered with remarkable skill. "This is beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "You have a gift." Owen shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Just a hobby. My father taught me when I was young, said a man should have something to occupy his hands during the winter months. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Owen took the carving back, his fingers running over the smooth wood. He would have liked you, I think. The simple statement, spoken so matter-of-factly, caught Elizabeth off guard. Before she could respond, the baby delivered a kick so forceful it made her gasp. Owen looked up in alarm. "Are you all right?" Elizabeth laughed, placing a hand on her stomach. "Yes, just a very enthusiastic kick. This little one has been doing somersaults all evening." "May I?" Owen asked, gesturing toward her belly with uncharacteristic hesitation. Surprised by the request but not displeased, Elizabeth nodded. "Of course." Owen moved to kneel beside her chair, placing his hand gently on the curve of her abdomen. For a moment, nothing happened, and Elizabeth thought the baby might have finally settled. Then came another powerful kick, directly beneath Owen's palm, his face transformed with wonder. "That's something," he said softly. "It's quite the sensation from the inside, too," Elizabeth replied, warmed by his obvious fascination. They stayed like that for another moment, Owen's hand resting lightly on her stomach, both of them waiting for the next movement. When it came, they shared a smile that felt strangely intimate, a connection formed through this small miracle growing beneath her heart. Finally, Owen withdrew his hand and stood. "I should let you get your rest," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Morning comes early on a ranch." "Thank you for the tarts," Elizabeth said, "and for sharing your carving with me." Owen nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he turned to leave. "Good night, Elizabeth." "Good night, Owen." As she watched him walk back to the main house, Elizabeth felt a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. It was a feeling she'd thought herself incapable of experiencing again after Joseph, a stirring of attraction, of connection, of possibility. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. She was in no position to entertain such feelings, pregnant with another man's child, dependent on Owen's charity. And yet, the way he had looked at her tonight, the gentleness in his touch, suggested that perhaps she wasn't alone in feeling this unexpected connection. Elizabeth placed her hand where Owen's had been moments before, her child moving beneath her palm. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Is there room in our life for someone new?" The baby kicked again, as if in answer, and Elizabeth smiled into the gathering dusk. As August gave way to September, changes came to both the ranch and Elizabeth herself. The days grew slightly shorter, the mornings cooler, and the cattle more restless as they sensed the approaching autumn. Elizabeth's body grew heavier, her movements more deliberate as the baby continued to develop. Owen and Olivia began preparations for the fall cattle drive to Miles City, where they would sell a portion of the herd before winter set in. The ranch buzzed with activity checking brands, selecting which animals would go to market, ensuring the remaining stock was healthy enough for the coming cold. Elizabeth did what she could to help, mainly by taking over more of the household duties to free Olivia for ranch work. She found satisfaction in keeping the house in order, cooking hearty meals for the hard-working siblings, and continuing to tend the garden, which now produced more vegetables than they could eat fresh. Under Olivia's guidance, she learned to can tomatoes and beans, to make preserves from the late berries, to dry herbs for winter use. One morning, as she was hanging laundry to dry in the brisk September air, Elizabeth noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Soon she could make out a wagon being driven at a rapid pace toward the ranch. Owen, who had been working with the horses nearby, saw it too. He approached Elizabeth, his expression wary. "Not expecting visitors today," he said quietly. "Why don't you go inside until we see who it is?" Something in his tone made Elizabeth comply without question. From the window of the main house, She watched as the wagon pulled into the yard. Two men sat on the seat, one she didn't recognize, and one whose bulky form sent a chill through her. It was Harlan, the man who had bid on her at the auction. Owen walked out to meet them, his posture casual but alert. Elizabeth couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the tension in Owen's shoulders, the aggressive stance of the visitors. After a few minutes of what appeared to be increasingly heated discussion, Owen's hand moved subtly closer to the pistol at his hip. The gesture wasn't lost on the visitors, who soon climbed back into their wagon and departed, though not before Harlan turned to glare at the house, as if he knew she was watching. When Owen came inside, his face was tight with controlled anger. "Just some men from town," he said, attempting to sound casual. "Nothing to worry about." "That was Harlan, wasn't it?" Elizabeth asked. "The man from the auction." Owen hesitated, then nodded. "He's been asking questions about you in town. Seems he can't accept that you're a free woman now." Fear, cold and familiar, settled in Elizabeth's stomach. "What did he want?" "He claims you still owe him money separately from the debts that were auctioned." Owen shook his head. "It's nonsense, of course. Just an excuse to try to get control of you." Elizabeth sank into a chair, her hand protectively covering her belly. "He won't give up, will he?" "He will," Owen said firmly. "I made it clear you're under my protection now, and Sheriff Davis knows the law. Your debts are paid in full." He knelt in front of her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Elizabeth, I promise you he can't touch you or your child. Not legally, not any other way." The conviction in his voice steadied her racing heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Owen reached out tentatively, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall to his side. "No need for thanks. I won't let anyone hurt you." He stood, his expression softening. "Try not to worry. Stress isn't good for the baby." After he left, Elizabeth remained in the chair for a long while, her thoughts tumbling over each other. Owen's protective response stirred complex emotions within her: gratitude, certainly, but also something warmer, more personal. The way he had looked at her, the fierce determination in his eyes when he promised her safety. It spoke of feelings that went beyond mere kindness to a stranger. And her own response, the leap of her heart when he knelt before her, the disappointment when he chose not to touch her, confirmed what she had been trying to deny for weeks now. She was falling in love with Owen Ellison. The realization should have frightened her. She was still in mourning for Joseph, still carrying his child. Her future was uncertain at best. And yet, the knowledge settled within her like a small, warm light, illuminating possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. That evening at supper, Olivia announced she would be traveling to town the following day for supplies. "We need flour and sugar for the winter stores," she explained. "And some fabric, if you're agreeable, Elizabeth, for baby clothes." The thought of Olivia in town, potentially encountering Harlan, worried Elizabeth. After what happened today, is that wise? Olivia glanced at her brother, who had obviously shared the confrontation with her. "Harlan's all talk," she said dismissively. "Besides, I'll be with Ben Morrison and his wife. They're coming to town too, and we'll travel together." "All the same, be careful," Owen advised, "and keep your eyes open. If Harlan's in one of his moods, he could be trouble." The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the journey to town. Olivia departed early, promising to return before dark with all the supplies they needed. Elizabeth spent the morning preserving the last of the tomatoes, then rested in the afternoon, her back aching more than usual. As the sun began its descent, Elizabeth grew increasingly uneasy. Olivia should have been home by now. When she mentioned this to Owen, who had come in from working with the cattle, he frowned. The Morrisons might have been delayed, he said, but she could hear the concern beneath his casual tone. "I'll saddle up and ride out to meet them. Before he could leave, however, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew them both outside. It was Ben Morrison, riding hard, his face grim. "Owen," he called as he reined in his horse. "There's trouble. Harlan and some of his men stopped us on the road back from town. They took Olivia," Elizabeth gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Owen's face went hard as stone. "Where?" he demanded. "About 5 miles east, where the road crosses Beaver Creek," Ben replied. "My wife's with our wagon just down the road. Olivia told me to ride ahead to warn you," Harlan said. He broke off, glancing uncomfortably at Elizabeth. "Said what?" Owen pressed. Ben sighed. "Said to tell you he'd release her unharmed in exchange for what's rightfully his. Said you'd know what that meant." Owen's gaze flicked briefly to Elizabeth, then back to Ben. "How many men with him?" "4, counting Harlan." Owen nodded once, his decision made. "Ben, I need you to stay here with Elizabeth. I'm going after my sister." "I'm coming with you," Elizabeth said firmly. "Absolutely not," Owen replied. "It's too dangerous and you're in no condition. I'm the one he wants," Elizabeth interrupted. "If I don't come, what's to stop him from hurting Olivia anyway once he realizes you won't trade me for her?" Owen's jaw tightened. "I won't deliver you to that man, not after everything." "And I won't let Olivia suffer because of me," Elizabeth countered. "But I'm not suggesting we simply give him what he wants. I have an idea." Despite Owen's strong objections, in the end Elizabeth's logic prevailed. Harlan wanted her, and without her participation, Olivia remained at risk. But Elizabeth had no intention of becoming Harlan's property. Her plan required careful timing and a bit of deception. As twilight descended over the Montana plains, Owen helped Elizabeth into the buggy, his face tight with worry. "I still don't like this," he said, tucking a blanket around her legs against the evening chill. "Neither do I," she admitted. "But it's the best chance we have of getting Olivia back safely." They rode in tense silence toward the meeting point, Ben Morrison following on horseback. Owen had strapped on an extra pistol and loaded a rifle that now lay across his knees. Elizabeth could feel the coiled tension in him, the readiness to protect those he loved at any cost. "Owen," she said softly as they neared Beaver Creek, "no matter what happens, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. You saved me when no one else would even look at me with kindness." Owen glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Elizabeth, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "These past weeks at your ranch they've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. A sense that the future might hold something more than just survival." She took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is that you've come to mean a great deal to me, more than I expected, more than might be wise, given my circumstances." Owen's hands tightened on the reins. "Your circumstances don't matter to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "Only you do. You and your child." He looked at her fully now, his green eyes reflecting the fading light. "I should have told you before now, but I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it. I care for you, Elizabeth. More than I've cared for any woman." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, filled Elizabeth with a warmth that pushed back against the fear of their current situation. "Owen, we'll talk more after," he promised. "When Olivia is safe and we're home again." Home. The word resonated through Elizabeth like a bell. Ellison Creek had become home to her in a way she hadn't anticipated, not just a refuge but a place where she belonged. They rounded a bend in the road and saw the scene ahead, Harlan's wagon parked near the creek crossing, 4 men standing around it. Olivia sat on the wagon seat, her hands tied before her, her expression defiant despite the gun one man casually pointed in her direction. Owen pulled their buggy to a halt about 30 yards away. Ben stopped his horse a short distance behind them. "That's far enough," Harlan called out, stepping forward, his gaze fixed on Elizabeth, a satisfied smile spreading across his fleshy face. "I see you brought what belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Harlan," Owen replied coldly, "but I'm willing to discuss terms for my sister's release." Harlan spat on the ground. "No discussion needed. It's a simple trade. The woman for your sister." Elizabeth laid a restraining hand on Owen's arm as he tensed beside her. "Let me handle this," she murmured. Owen gave an almost imperceptible nod. They had discussed this moment, planned for it, but Elizabeth knew how difficult it was for him to hold back when his sister was in danger. "Mr. Harlan," Elizabeth called, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm willing to come with you, but I have conditions." Harlan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're not in a position to make conditions, woman." "On the contrary," Elizabeth replied, "I'm exactly in that position. You want me, and I'm willing to cooperate to save everyone the unpleasantness of further conflict. But first, you release Olivia. And second, you allow me to bring my possessions." She gestured to a small trunk in the back of their buggy. "It contains items for my child." "Surely you wouldn't deny an unborn baby its necessities." Harlan considered this, his greedy eyes calculating. "Fine," he finally said. "The trunk can come, and I'll release the sister when you're halfway between our wagons." Elizabeth nodded, then turned to Owen. "Help me down, please," she said loud enough for Harlan to hear. Then, in a whisper, "Remember the plan. Wait for my signal." Owen's face was a mask of controlled fury as he assisted her from the buggy, his hands lingering on her waist. "Be careful," he murmured. "I'll be right behind you." Elizabeth squared her shoulders and began walking slowly toward Harlan's wagon, one hand supporting her belly, the other hanging free at her side. Behind her, she could hear Owen lifting the trunk from their buggy. Olivia was released from the wagon, her hands still bound, and pushed roughly in Elizabeth's direction. The two women passed each other at the halfway point, exchanging brief glances of encouragement. "Keep walking," Elizabeth whispered as they drew level. "Don't look back." As Olivia continued toward Owen, Elizabeth approached Harlan, who watched her with undisguised avarice. "Ah, Mrs. Hayes," he said, emphasizing the Mrs. mockingly. "You've led me on quite a chase." "Miss Hayes," Elizabeth corrected, stopping a few feet away from him. "I'm a widow, as you well know." Harlan's smile widened unpleasantly. "Not for long. I've got a preacher waiting in town who's not too particular about the ceremonies he performs. By tomorrow, you'll be Mrs. Harlan." Elizabeth suppressed a shudder, keeping her expression neutral. "My trunk?" she inquired, gesturing behind her where Owen was supposedly following with her belongings. Harlan turned his attention to Owen, and in that crucial moment of distraction, Elizabeth reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew the small pistol Olivia had given her before they left the ranch. It was a lady's derringer, small enough to conceal but powerful enough at close range. "Mr. Harlan," she said clearly, raising the pistol to aim at his chest. "I won't be marrying you tomorrow or any day. Now tell your men to drop their weapons." Harlan froze, his face contorting with shock and rage. Behind him, his men reached for their guns only to find themselves covered by Owen, who had abandoned the pretense of carrying a trunk and now held his rifle trained on the group. "I wouldn't," Owen advised coldly. "The lady is an excellent shot, and so am I." It was a bluff. Elizabeth had never fired a gun in her life, but Harlan had no way of knowing that. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Ben Morrison rode up, his own rifle ready, and the odds shifted decisively in their favor. "Tell them, Harlan," Elizabeth repeated, her arm steady despite her racing heart. Harlan's face twisted with hatred, but he wasn't a brave man at heart. "Do as she says," he growled to his companions. "Drop him." One by one, the men laid their weapons on the ground. Owen approached cautiously, keeping his rifle trained on them. "Now," he said, "you're going to get on your wagon and ride back to town, and if I ever see you near my ranch or Miss Hayes again, I'll shoot you where you stand." His voice held a steel that left no doubt he meant every word. Harlan glared at Elizabeth. "You think this is over? A woman like you, no husband, a bastard on the way, you'll never be anything but property to men like me." Elizabeth held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "No, Mr. Harlan, that's where you're wrong. I'm not property. I never was. And neither is any other woman you've tried to buy or intimidate." She lowered the gun slightly. "Now go, before I reconsider letting you leave in one piece." With a final venomous look, Harlan climbed onto his wagon. His men followed, and soon the wagon was rattling away down the road toward town. As soon as they were out of sight, Elizabeth's knees began to shake. The derringer slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, and she might have fallen if Owen hadn't stepped quickly to her side, supporting her with a strong arm around her waist. "Easy," he murmured. "You did wonderfully." "Bravest thing I've ever seen." Olivia rushed to her other side. "Are you all right? The baby?" Elizabeth nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "We're fine, just relieved it's over." Ben Morrison approached, leading their horses. "That was something to see, Miss Hayes." Not many would stand up to Harlan like that. "Will he come back, do you think?" Elizabeth asked, looking to Owen. Owen shook his head. "Not likely. He's a coward at heart, and he knows the sheriff would take my side if it came to legal trouble. Besides," he added with the hint of a smile, "I think you scared him more than I did." The ride back to Ellison Creek was quiet, all of them processing the events of the evening. Elizabeth sat close to Owen in the buggy, drawing strength from his solid presence. When his arms settled around her shoulders, she leaned into him gratefully, too exhausted to question the rightness of it. At the ranch, Olivia insisted on examining Elizabeth thoroughly, worried that the stress might have harmed the baby. But all seemed well. The child moved vigorously, apparently undisturbed by its mother's adventures. Later, after Olivia had gone to bed and Ben had departed for his own ranch, Elizabeth found herself alone with Owen on the porch of the main house. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on velvet. "I meant what I said earlier," Owen said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About caring for you." Elizabeth turned to look at him, his face half illuminated by the light from the window behind them. "I meant what I said too," she replied softly. Owen reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know your heart still holds Joseph's memory. I know your child will always be a reminder of him. I wouldn't ask you to forget." "Joseph will always be part of me," Elizabeth agreed. "He was my first love and the father of my child, but—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "My heart has room for more than memory, Owen. These past weeks, watching you with Olivia, seeing how you care for this land, how you treat others with respect and kindness, I've come to care for you in a way I never expected to feel again." Owen's hand tightened around hers. "I want you to stay, Elizabeth, not just until the baby comes. I want you to make your home here with me, with us." His green eyes searched hers intently. "I want to help raise your child to be a father to them if you'll allow it, and perhaps in time if you're willing. I would like to make you my wife." The directness of his proposal took Elizabeth's breath away. It was so like Owen, honest, straightforward, without artifice or pretense. And yet behind the simple words, she could hear the depth of feeling he wasn't yet comfortable expressing more openly. "Owen," she began, her voice catching with emotion, "you barely know me, and I come with complications, a child, a past, debts that you've already paid once." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you're strong and brave. I know you're kind and hardworking. I know my ranch has felt more like a home since you arrived than it has in years." He paused, his expression softening. "And I know that when I look at you, I see my future." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to contain them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it." Owen's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry and responsibility that usually marked his features. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Elizabeth responded with a certainty that surprised even her hand rising to touch his cheek as their lips met. It was a simple kiss, chaste and tender, but it held promises that made her heart swell with hope. When they broke apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "We'll take this slowly," he murmured. "Give you time to settle, to have your baby. No rush." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, with a smile, she took his hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby was moving energetically. "I think someone approves of our plan." Owen's laugh, warm and genuine, joined with hers in the quiet Montana night. And for the first time since she'd stood on that auction block in Copper Gulch, Elizabeth Hayes felt truly, completely free. October brought cooler weather to Ellison Creek, the aspen trees around the property turning brilliant gold against the evergreen pines. Elizabeth's due date approached, and preparations for both the birth and the coming winter occupied most of the ranch's attention. Owen and Olivia completed the cattle drive to Miles City, returning with supplies for the winter months and news from town, including confirmation that Harlan had departed for the Dakota Territory after some unspecified trouble with the sheriff. The knowledge that he was gone lifted a weight from Elizabeth's shoulders. Dr. Miller visited twice more, pronouncing both Elizabeth and the baby healthy and estimating the birth would occur in early November. The cabin was fully prepared now. A cradle that Owen had crafted with his own hands sat near the bed. Tiny garments sewn by Olivia and Elizabeth were folded neatly in a drawer, and a sturdy rocking chair waited by the fireplace. On a particularly fine late October afternoon, Owen suggested a walk to show Elizabeth something he'd been working on. They strolled hand in hand through the golden grass, Elizabeth moving slowly but steadily despite her advanced pregnancy. "Where are we going?" she asked as they crested a small rise overlooking the western portion of the ranch. Owen pointed to a partially constructed building nestled in a grove of aspen trees. "There," he said. "It's not much yet, but it will be by spring." As they drew closer, Elizabeth could see it was the framework for a house larger than her cabin but smaller than the main ranch house, with a foundation already laid and walls beginning to take shape. "A new house?" she asked, curious. Owen nodded, a hint of nervousness in his expression. "For us. For our family." He guided her through the skeleton of rooms, pointing out features as they went. "The main room here, a kitchen there. 2 bedrooms to start, with space to add more as needed, a proper porch where we can sit in the evenings." Elizabeth turned slowly, taking it all in. "You've been planning this for a while." "Since that day with Harlan," Owen admitted, "when I realized I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving." He took her hands in his. "I know we agreed to wait, to take things slowly, and we can still do that. But I wanted you to see that I'm serious about our future together." Deeply moved by his gesture, Elizabeth reached up to touch his face. "I never doubted you were serious, Owen. It's one of the things I love about you." It was the first time she had used the word love, and Owen's eyes widened slightly before a slow smile spread across his face. "Say that again," he requested softly. Elizabeth smiled back at him, suddenly sure in a way she hadn't been before. "I love you, Owen Ellison." Owen gathered her carefully in his arms, mindful of her belly between them. "And I love you, Elizabeth Hayes." He kissed her, more deeply than their previous kisses had been, a seal on the words they'd finally spoken aloud. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, Owen rested a gentle hand on her stomach. "And I'll love this child as my own, I promise you that." Elizabeth covered his hand with hers. "I know you will. You already do." They walked back to the ranch as the sun began to set, discussing plans for the house, for the winter, for their future. It was a conversation full of hope and possibility, the kind Elizabeth had thought she might never have again after Joseph's death. That night, as she prepared for bed in her cabin, Elizabeth felt the first twinge of what she recognized as labor pains. She wasn't alarmed. Dr. Miller had prepared her well, explaining that first babies often took their time in coming. She managed to sleep intermittently, and by morning was certain the birth was beginning, though still in its early stages. She walked to the main house for breakfast, not wanting to cause unnecessary concern. But Olivia, sharp-eyed as always, noticed her wince when a contraction hit as she was helping clear the table. "It started, hasn't it?" Olivia asked directly. Elizabeth nodded. "Early still. Dr. Miller said the first stage could last a day or more." Olivia immediately took charge, sending Owen to fetch Mrs. Morrison, who had experience as a midwife, while she helped Elizabeth back to the cabin and prepared everything for the birth. By mid-afternoon, Elizabeth's labor had progressed significantly. Mrs. Morrison, a capable woman in her 50s, arrived with a basket of herbs and supplies, assuring Owen that all was proceeding normally and sending him away to wait with Ben. "Men are useless at times like these," she declared with good-natured firmness. "Best thing he can do is stay out of our way and maybe chop some extra firewood." The labor intensified as evening approached, the contractions coming faster and stronger. Elizabeth moved between the bed and the rocking chair, finding the gentle motion soothing during the brief respites between pains. Olivia and Mrs. Morrison attended her tirelessly, offering encouragement, cool cloths for her forehead, and sips of water. Outside, Owen paced the yard, splitting wood until his arms ached, then cleaning the stables with unneeded thoroughness, anything to keep his mind occupied. Ben Morrison sat on the porch, smoking his pipe and offering occasional words of reassurance. "First babies take their time," he said philosophically. "My Sarah was in labor near 20 hours with our Thomas. Strong woman, your Elizabeth. She'll do fine." Owen stopped his pacing, struck by the phrase, "your Elizabeth." It was true, he realized. Somehow, in the space of a few months, she had become his, just as he had become hers. And now she was bringing a new life into the world, a child that wasn't his by blood but would be his by choice, by love, by commitment. As the night deepened, Elizabeth's cries became more frequent. Owen stationed himself on the porch of her cabin, unable to go farther but unwilling to retreat to the main house. He listened to the murmured encouragement of the women inside, to Elizabeth's gasping breaths and occasional moans, feeling utterly helpless and fiercely protective all at once. Then, shortly after midnight, a new sound cut through the November night, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. Owen froze, his heart seeming to stop before racing forward at double speed. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the cabin door opened and Olivia stepped out, her face tired but radiant. "You have a son," she told him simply. "A healthy boy, and Elizabeth is doing well." Relief and joy flooded through Owen in equal measure. May I see them?" Olivia nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. The cabin was warm, lit by the gentle glow of lanterns and the fire. Elizabeth sat propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat but her face luminous as she gazed down at the small bundle in her arms. Mrs. Morrison was busy cleaning up, gathering soiled linens and emptying basins of water. Elizabeth looked up as Owen approached, her smile widening. "Meet your son," she said softly. Owen sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. The baby was tiny, red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair. As Owen watched, the child opened his eyes, blinking unfocusedly at the world he had just entered. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The tiny fingers curled reflexively around his, and something in Owen's chest expanded almost painfully. "Would you like to hold him?" Elizabeth asked. Owen hesitated. I don't know how." "Support his head," Mrs. Morrison instructed, coming over to guide the baby into Owen's arms. There, just like that. The weight of the child, so little, yet somehow so significant, settled against Owen's chest. He looked down at the little face, trying to memorize every detail. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked Elizabeth. She nodded. "Joseph, after his father." Then, watching Owen's face carefully, she added, "And Owen, after the man who will raise him. Joseph Owen Hayes, unless—" She hesitated. "Unless you would prefer he have your name." Owen looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "You mean that you'd want him to be an Ellison?" "I'd want us all to be Ellisons," Elizabeth said softly. "If your offer still stands." In answer, Owen carefully shifted the baby to one arm, using his free hand to reach into his pocket. He withdrew a simple gold ring, well polished but clearly antique. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it since. Well, since I knew I wanted to ask you properly." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Elizabeth Hayes, will you marry me? Will you make a family with me, you and Joseph Owen and any other children we might be blessed with? Will you grow old with me on this ranch, through good years and bad, through all that life brings us?" Tears slipped down Elizabeth's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Owen. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her. Their son cradled between them, a family formed not by blood or obligation, but by choice and love and the courage to begin again. 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold November morning, Elizabeth Hayes became Elizabeth Ellison in a simple ceremony performed in the main house at Ellison Creek. The guests were Few Ben and Sarah Morrison, Dr. Miller, the minister from Miles City, and a few neighboring ranchers and their wives. Olivia stood as Elizabeth's witness, beaming with happiness for her brother and the woman who had become like a sister to her. Elizabeth wore a dress of deep blue wool that Olivia had helped her make, adorned with a lace collar that had been her mother's. Owen was handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his face solemn as he spoke his vows, but his eyes full of joy. Joseph Owen, now officially Joseph Owen Ellison, slept peacefully in Sarah Morrison's arms throughout the ceremony, waking only as his parents sealed their marriage with a kiss, as if sensing the significance of the moment. Afterward, there was a celebratory meal, music from a fiddle played by one of the neighbors, and much good-natured teasing of the newlyweds. As the short winter day began to fade, the guests departed, leaving the new family Owen, Elizabeth, Joseph, and Olivia alone at the ranch. That night, after Joseph was fed and settled in his cradle, Owen carried Elizabeth across the threshold of the cabin that would be their home until the new house was completed. It had been thoroughly cleaned and decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons by Olivia, who had tactfully retired to the main house for the night. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Owen set Elizabeth gently on her feet, suddenly shy despite the weeks of growing closeness between them. "Mrs. Ellison," he said softly, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. Elizabeth smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had saved her in so many ways. "Mr. Ellison," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "My husband." Owen leaned down to kiss her, his arms encircling her waist. This kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, full of promise and desire long held in check out of respect for her condition and her grief. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "More than I have words to tell you." Elizabeth smiled, taking his hand and leading him toward the bed that was now theirs to share. "Then show me," she invited softly. In the quiet of that November night, as snow began to fall gently outside, Owen and Elizabeth Ellison began their marriage in earnest, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other despite every obstacle, and who would face whatever came next together, as a family built on love, respect, and the courage to believe in second chances. Spring came early to Montana in 1877, the snow melting from the pastures by mid-March, revealing tender green shoots beneath. At Ellison Creek, the new season brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The house Owen had begun building the previous fall was nearly complete, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that would be the Ellison family home for generations to come. Elizabeth had been involved in every aspect of its planning, from the arrangement of the rooms to the placement of windows to capture the best light. Joseph Owen, now 5 months old, was thriving, a happy, healthy baby with his mother's eyes and a temperament that alternated between his father's calm steadiness and occasional bursts of determination that Olivia claimed came from Elizabeth. On a particularly fine April morning, as Elizabeth sat on the porch of their cabin nursing Joseph, Owen approached from the direction of the new house, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I have something to show you," he said, offering his hand to help her up. Elizabeth adjusted her clothing and settled Joseph against her shoulder. "Is it the house? Are the floors finished? You'll see," Owen replied mysteriously, leading her along the path that had been worn between the cabin and the construction site over the winter months. As they approached, Elizabeth could see that something was different. A small wooden sign had been mounted beside the front door, the letters burned into the wood with careful precision. "Ellison Home ESD, 1877. "It's lovely," Elizabeth said, touching the smooth surface of the sign. "That's not all," Owen replied, opening the front door and gesturing for her to enter. The main room was complete now, with polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace even larger than the one in their cabin, and windows that filled the space with spring light. But what caught Elizabeth's eye was a new piece of furniture placed prominently near the hearth, a rocking chair, more elegant than the practical one in their cabin, with curved arms and a high back, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and small flowers. "Owen," she breathed, stepping closer to examine the craftsmanship. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a touch of pride in his expression. "Been working on it evenings since Joseph was born. Wanted it to be a surprise for when we move in." Elizabeth ran her fingers over the polished wood, recognizing the same skill that had gone into the small horse carving she'd first admired months ago. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "A family heirloom in the making." Owen's smile widened. "That's what I was thinking. Something to pass down along with the ranch." Elizabeth settled into the chair, finding it perfectly suited to her form, the gentle rock soothing Joseph, who was beginning to fuss. "When do you think we can move in?" "Another week, maybe 2, Owen replied, leaning against the door frame. "Just some finishing touches left. Olivia's already planning a celebration for the day we move. Invited half the county, I think." Elizabeth laughed. She's excited to have the cabin to herself again. Not that she hasn't been wonderful with Joseph, but I know our midnight feedings disrupt her sleep. Owen crossed the room to stand behind the rocking chair, placing his hands on Elizabeth's shoulders. Speaking of Olivia, she offered to watch Joseph this afternoon if you wanted to ride out with me to check the north pasture. The wildflowers are starting to bloom. Elizabeth tilted her head back to look up at him. That sounds wonderful. I haven't been on a horse since before Joseph was born. The day was perfect for riding warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and a sky so blue it seemed almost unreal. Owen saddled 2 horses while Elizabeth prepared a simple picnic lunch. They left Joseph in Olivia's capable hands, the baby contentedly playing with a wooden rattle his aunt had made him. Elizabeth had been an accomplished rider before her pregnancy, and though she was a bit stiff at first, the rhythm of horseback soon returned to her. They rode side by side across the ranch, checking cattle as they went, Owen pointing out new calves born in the early spring. The north pasture was indeed carpeted with wildflowers, purple lupine, golden balsam root, and delicate blue forget-me-nots, creating a tapestry of color against the new grass. They dismounted near a stand of aspen trees, spreading a blanket in a sunny spot for their picnic. As they ate bread and cheese and dried apple slices, Elizabeth found herself studying her husband's profile against the spring landscape. 6 months of marriage had only deepened her love for Owen. His quiet strength, his unwavering support, his gentle patience with Joseph, all of it confirmed daily that she had been blessed beyond measure when he stepped forward at that auction. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, catching her gaze. Elizabeth smiled. "I was thinking how different my life would be if you hadn't come to town that day last summer, if you hadn't paid my debts." Owen reached for her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over the gold band on her finger. "I've never told you the whole truth about that day," he said quietly. Elizabeth tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" Owen looked out over the pasture, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I didn't just happen to be in town for supplies," he admitted. "I went specifically because I'd heard about the auction." Surprise flickered through Elizabeth. "You did? But why?" Owen's expression grew distant, as if looking into the past. "My mother was sold that way," he said softly. "Before she met my father. She was a young widow like you with debts she couldn't pay. A man bought her contract, forced her to work in his household. My father was a friend of her late husband. When he discovered what had happened, he paid off her remaining debt and set her free." His eyes returned to Elizabeth's face. "They fell in love during her recovery at his homestead, married a year later. She told me the story when I was 12, made me promise I'd never stand by while someone suffered that kind of injustice." Elizabeth squeezed his hand, deeply moved by this glimpse into his past. "So when you heard about me?" "I went to town intending to pay whatever debts were being auctioned," Owen confirmed. "Didn't matter who it was. But then I saw you standing there, so brave despite your fear, protecting your child with your hands." He paused, his voice growing husky. "And something happened that I hadn't counted on, something I don't know if I can explain properly." "Try," Elizabeth encouraged softly. Owen looked directly into her eyes. "It was like recognition, like I'd been waiting to find you without knowing I was waiting. Like everything in my life, this ranch, the skills my parents taught me, even the memories of my mother's story had been preparing me for that moment for you." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes at the simple poetry of his words. This man, who often struggled to express his deeper feelings, had just given her a gift more precious than any material possession, the truth of his heart, unguarded and complete. "I felt it too," she whispered. "Not right away, perhaps. I was too frightened, too overwhelmed. But later, when we rode to the ranch together, when you showed me the cabin. I felt like I'd come home, even though I'd never been there before." Owen lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I thank God every day that I listened to that feeling, that I went to town that day, that you were brave enough to trust a stranger." "Not a stranger," Elizabeth corrected gently. "The other half of my heart. I just didn't know it yet." They came together in a kiss that held all the tenderness of their growing love, all the passion of their youth, all the promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both were a little breathless, their eyes shining with shared emotion. "We should head back," Owen said reluctantly. "Olivia will be wondering where we are and Joseph will be hungry." Elizabeth nodded but made no move to rise. "Soon," she agreed. "But first, I have something to tell you." Owen's expression grew attentive, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. "Is everything all right?" Elizabeth smiled, taking both his hands in hers. "Everything is perfect and about to get even more so." She brought his hands to rest on her still flat stomach. "Doctor Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have another baby, Owen. Around November, he thinks." Owen's face transformed with wonder, joy blooming in his eyes. "A baby," he repeated, as if needing to hear it again to believe it. Elizabeth nodded, her own happiness reflected in his expression. "Our baby," she emphasized. "Yours and mine." "Our baby," Owen echoed, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "Oh, Elizabeth, I didn't think I could be happier than I already was, but I was wrong." They sat together for a long time, planning and dreaming, imagining Joseph as a big brother, discussing names, envisioning Christmases and birthdays with their growing family. When they finally mounted their horses to return to the ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting a golden glow over the land that was their home. As they approached Ellison Creek, Elizabeth looked at the scene before her, the main house where Olivia would continue to live, but increasingly spend time helping Ben Morrison with his ranch books, a task that seemed to be taking longer each visit. The cabin that had sheltered her through childbirth and the early months of marriage. The new house nearly ready for their growing family. The barns and corrals and outbuildings of a prosperous, well-run ranch. All of it represented security, belonging, home concepts she had feared lost forever when she stood on that auction block less than a year ago. Instead, she had found not only safety but love, not only shelter but family, not only freedom but purpose. Owen rode up beside her, his expression questioning. "What is it?" Elizabeth smiled at the man who had made all of this possible, not through rescue alone but through partnership, through respect, through love freely given and joyfully returned. "I was just thinking," she said, "how sometimes the darkest moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings if we're brave enough to keep our hearts open." Owen reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And if we're lucky enough to find someone willing to pay our debts and set us free," he added with a smile. Elizabeth laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful valley. "That too," she agreed. "That most of all." Hand in hand, they rode toward home, toward family, toward a future built on a foundation of love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, a pregnant woman sold at auction. A cowboy with the courage to stand against injustice, and the healing power of second chances in the wild, beautiful heart of Montana.